Welcome to SUITEWORLD 2021, Automating Grants Administration with PyanGo. PyanGo is a proud sponsor of this digital event. Feel free to submit questions to the chat area. We are monitoring the chat, and we will get back to you with any questions not addressed at the end of the session. Next, let me introduce our speakers for today. Mark Brousseau, leading procurement expert and industry analyst. Sean Northrop, Deputy Director at Indianapolis MPO. Matthew Hudson, Senior Grants Accountant at Kessler Foundation, and Matthew Weiner, Manager of Sponsored Research Administration at Kessler. Mark, why don't you provide an overview of the challenges many government agencies and other nonprofits deal with?
Studies show that up to 44% of an organization's time can be spent on manual grants management activities that don't directly relate to program delivery. The question you might be wondering is, well, how did we get here? Well, managing grants can be complex and time-consuming and risky. Organizations have got to deal with multiple stakeholders and multiple locations, multiple departments, lots of administrative tasks, lots of project requirements, and, oh yes, ever-increasing regulations. And many organizations are using spreadsheets to manage their grants. Some organizations, well, they try to manage grants by modifying systems that were designed for other purposes. And all of this leads to a lot of inefficiencies and unnecessary complexity. Manual and these semi-automated approaches to grants management only create 5 really big issues for organizations. The first is operational bottlenecks. For many organizations, managing grants means pasting together data from multiple systems and sorting through disparate spreadsheets and tracking information provided by different stakeholders. You also have lots of errors when you have manual and semi-automated approaches to managing grants. Well, that's going to significantly increase your chances of errors and mistakes. You're also going to have burdensome compliance issues. Manual and semi-automated grants management processes make it hard to comply with mandates and grant requirements, and even to enforce donor terms and conditions. You're also likely to face poor communication and lousy collaboration. It's hard for stakeholders to collaborate on grants, to access that single source of truth, or even to ensure compliance when their organization relies on manual and semi-automated approaches. And finally, manual and semi-automated approaches to grants management doesn't provide the reporting that organizations need. And things are worse for organizations that lack the tools to tightly manage their expenses. And all of these are the reasons that more and more organizations are automating their grants processes. Automated solutions help organizations, big and small, with full grant management and accounting, matching of grants with other funding sources, automated direct and indirect cost calculations, and even pass-through sub-award expense management. Automating grants and sub-award management, well, it provides big benefits to organizations: streamlined operations, better accuracy, reduced compliance burden, streamlined communication, better collaboration, and enhanced visibility.
Sean, tell us a little bit about Indianapolis MPO and your role in the organization.
Very happy to. I'm the Deputy Director at the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization. We're a unit of government. We're a regional entity, so we have a board made up of every city, town, and county in central Indiana around Indianapolis. We cover about 1,500 square miles and about 2 million people in population. Our role as a governmental entity is to make sure that federal gas tax money that flows back into our region gets spent in accordance with the wishes of local elected officials, so that decisions aren't being made for how infrastructure projects get spent at the federal level or state level. We have all of the mayors and town council presidents and county commissioners and transit agencies all come together quarterly around a table with us, and we make decisions about how those investments are going to be made and how we're going to prioritize transportation investments for the next 25 years. We receive approximately $55 million a year from the federal government. Every major region of over 50,000 people in the country has an MPO, an organization similar to us that has at very least a planning and infrastructure allocation program like we do.
Why is grants strategically important at Indianapolis MPO?
Grants management is foundational to what we do. All of the grants that we receive from the federal government require a match. And our job every year is to spend those grants down. So it's funny, every time we work with business consultants, we say we're not like a lot of private enterprise. Our profit, we have no profit margin at all. Our job is to get money every year and spend that money down to zero every year or within a year afterwards. Most of the grants that pay for our operations are an 80-20 match. So 80% of this expenditure needs to be the federal grant that we receive. And then there's an additional 20% that comes from local match. And that's the dues that all of our 36 member organizations pay to us. The cities, towns, and counties around Indianapolis, pay that match on the dues each year. And so all of our expenses, when they go out 80% federal and 20% local for the entire cost.
What are the most important features you were looking for in an ERP solution?
There were a few things that were big priorities for us. One was transparency and knowing where we stand on all of our grants. Like I said, our job is to spend our grants down to zero every year. And so we had to know how much money was encumbered and how much we had left to contract. And that's central to how we operate the organization. It was a very hard number to figure out in our previous environment. Within PeopleSoft, we used a number of reports that we built our own custom Excel workbook out of. I think I had 3 or 4 pivot tables that I would update just to try and come down to that one number. How much have we expended? How much is encumbered? And then how much do we have left to contract? And then be able to report that back out on a monthly basis to the state. Where do we stand? What have we done with your grant money? How much more is coming? When are these projects going to be done? So that was really key, was knowing where we stood. And then the other big key, if I had to say, which was more important, I'd say they were probably 1 and 2. They were probably close to 50-50. The other one was just compliance, making sure that we could pass an audit on our own.
Tell me about the benefits MPO has achieved with an automated grants management solution.
We've gone kind of interchangeably between government and nonprofit when we're talking about NetSuite. And I just wanted to clarify that we use the NetSuite nonprofit instance. It's worked very well for us. We fit well into it. We've changed some of the names to kind of match up with our terminology. That's been like a really small change, but it's been really good. PyanGo kind of being built on the NetSuite platform and being seamless is absolutely true. It's got its own tab. It's tied to each one of the transactions that we do. Like I said, it's hard as a user to differentiate, I think, between one and the other sometimes, just because it is incredibly seamless. I think if it had been a separate process, it could have been tricky for us to kind of keep track of the budgeting separate from the day-to-day financial tracking. So I'm very thankful that the two are very combined. We stay in compliance on our grants. We know where we stand at any given time. That's a huge change. It takes a lot less staff time to try and figure it out. It probably saves us, I would say, 2 to 4 hours a week, kind of in oversight on doing that in staff time. We can report on the budgets much, much more easily to the state. We see our grant balances. We did a custom report with PyanGo early on that was just a total game changer, where we calculated that grant amount to contract. And that's kind of the central number that management uses here at the MPO to know what we need to take on and do. And so that's been, the single most useful thing of the entire effort, I would say.
Now, let's hear from Kessler Foundation. Kessler brings a different perspective on managing grants from a research and grant-making approach. Why is grants management strategically important to Kessler Foundation?
Keeping track of grant information is extremely vital to this organization and other nonprofits. From a high-level perspective, the foundation needs to have concise information available to show our senior management, board of trustees, donors, and other stakeholders the foundation is meeting its own strategic goals and research. In terms of sponsored research, what is our sponsored funding portfolio made of? What are our numbers of federal, state, nonprofits, and philanthropic awards? Are we actually submitting and receiving funding in all of our centers and specific research sectors or areas of interest to our board and donors? Our development team utilizes this as well to coordinate with potential donors who may want their gift to expand on a specific line of research in which we have been previously successful. This also aids in tracking the career path of our postdocs and our research scientists.
What was the tipping point when you realized you needed a better way to do things?
Well, as I mentioned, we have 10 active research centers. We submit many opportunities throughout the year. Last year, we submitted 125 applications. The tipping point for us came with the knowledge that there had been opportunities that had been submitted without research administration, finance, or senior management knowledge and approval. We also had awards that were made without knowledge of the original submission. That really was the tipping point. We knew we had to change the process, get a handle on our grants that we were submitting and our awards. We had to change this process, how it would be done from the initial stage. So the grant management solution allowed for this new process to take place.
Can you tell me the process that you used to evaluate potential solutions, and why did you select PyanGo?
We had already planned to change our accounting system, but at this time we needed to have a grant management component as part of it. So we reached out to the community of independent research institutes, which Kessler Foundation is one. We asked them, what do they use to get an idea of how they were conducting grant management and what were they using for their accounting needs, including grant management capabilities. That was the important part. We also considered our price range for evaluating a solution.
Tell us about the processes beyond grants management that you automated with PyanGo.
So as an accountant, one of our main goals with PyanGo was automating our indirect cost and revenue processes. And in order to kind of illustrate why this was so important, I kind of want to take a step back and describe what our process was before PyanGo. And this process may sound kind of familiar to what other accountants do in this field. So the process would typically be exporting data from a legacy accounting system, compiling the data, confirming that it's actually accurate and check it for user errors, and then bring this data into a separate Excel template to run indirect cost, being whatever percentage you're contracted at for each of your grants. After that was done, I would have to re-export that to another Excel file and re-import it into the legacy system. This process would then have to be repeated for revenue as well. In totality, I would say this process took about 3 to 4 hours on a monthly basis. However, after this process was done, it wouldn't be able to account for any journal entries entered after it was done, meaning that the 3 and 4 hours that I put into it could kind of be invalidated by future transactions. With that being said, with PyanGo, on the other hand, we were able to work with the programmers to have a process where I could run a simple query, run the time period that I want to run, however many grants I want to run, whether it's one or all of them. And basically within a click of a button, within 30 seconds, I could have that information that used to take 3 or 4 hours. And the beautiful part about this is, to kind of repeat what Mark said earlier, it improves accuracy. And I think most importantly, it improves transparency. So my superiors and my colleagues could then look at the indirect cost and revenue journal entries and not have to figure out how I did the entry. They could kind of look at the automated entry and go from there. Additionally, we actually were able to replicate this process with our fringe benefit allocations as well. Our controller used to spend a great deal of time doing this, and I can't speak directly on this topic, but I know that it probably saved him at least 1 or 2 days in processing time.
What benefits has Kessler Foundation achieved by deploying the PyanGo solution?
With our new grant management process, referring back to that tipping point, all information about an opportunity or a new source of funding goes through my office first. This allows me to have control over the initial stages and to make sure I have all of the information. It's not slipping through the cracks. The reporting. Another benefit, system allows for flexibility in reporting with CSV, Excel, PDF files. These are customizable reporting for what data you need. This provides high-level reporting to senior management and board of trustees, referring back to the strategically importance. We know at any time what opportunities are in the pipeline, and if we are meeting our strategic research goals of the organization. Are we submitting to opportunities and winning award? That's the key. A repository for every related document to an opportunity, award, and milestone. This is a fantastic benefit. You know where everything is. You're not hunting around for files. It's right here. Milestones, one of my most favorite features of the PyanGo grant management system. This is so important, and it refers back to compliance. As I mentioned, we have a lot of active awards. There's a lot of reporting, as people who are listening know. And the more awards you have, the more reports, and they're spread out through over the year. This has always been an extremely difficult thing to keep track of. So for the milestones, which is customizable by type and date due, it sends out auto emails to all the responsible people. You can have the template for the report uploaded right there. You're able to do the report, you get the notification, the reminder, and you're following the compliance. It's absolutely necessary to have this to keep track of. So that is probably one of the best features of the system. There are many others, but this is one of the best. It really takes care of the process of reporting for all of these awards.
What lessons learned can you share with the NetSuite customers listening in today?
You have to know you're going to be intimately involved in the customization of the system. This is not an off-the-shelf system. Put together a great team of people at your nonprofit that's willing to do the initial work. There is great benefit afterwards, but there is a buy-in at the beginning. You have to do your work. Our goal is to have the grant management PyanGo side work seamlessly with NetSuite accounting side, as when an opportunity is funded and the accounting is now in NetSuite. These two areas have to be mapped and linked together. And I have to say, the technical support we got for this was fantastic and got everything accomplished with very little difficulty for this.
Next, I'd like to demo PyanGo Grants Management, and you can see how it is built on top of the NetSuite platform.
It is built on top of the NetSuite platform. So you're looking at NetSuite, but we have a whole menu system that's dedicated to doing a variety of activities within grants. So I'm going to jump right into what we've really been talking about over the last 10 to 15 minutes is the managing the grant award. So here I have this award called the Wounded Warrior Research Grant, and we have a description about what it's related to. We can assign that grant to a principal or grant administrator, and this highlights some of the integration here as we have this little pop-up that shows that this is the employee and what their ID is, their job title, etc. So that just highlights again how we've integrated within NetSuite. And these labels can all be renamed as needed. So if you don't use the term principal investigator, we can use grant administrator or any other type of term. You can set up grants for single year, multi-year, rank grants according to priority. So we have a wide variety of attributes that we track for each grant award. We track all of the financials for the award, not only total revenue and expenses to date, but also your current fiscal year's award expenses and revenue. And then, of course, that can tell us basically what your cash position is for a particular grant. We track a variety of dates. Dates are really important with grants. So when does it start? When does it end? When did we apply for it? When is the execution date? When was it last modified? So we can track all of that. If you're not as interested in some of these fields, we can remove them. And that's part of that customization process that Matt was talking about, is to work with your grants team to identify exactly how you want your grants to be displayed and managed within NetSuite. Then if I go to the bottom here, here's the milestones that Matt was also talking about. So we can set up a variety of different kinds of milestones. These are not just limited to this list here. You can define your own milestones, and then we will send out alerts to the people responsible as well as the team involved in it on a, let's say, 2 weeks prior to the milestone, 4 weeks, etc. We can work with you on that particular timing for the milestone. Most grants, I can keep track of my expected payments. So if I'm receiving funds in advance of a particular grant, I can schedule those and then link them to actual invoices and payments once they are created within NetSuite. I can set up terms and conditions for each of my grants. In this case here, I have an indirect cost rate that will be then used to determine my indirect cost expenses. And we do that, if I jump over here to the allowable expenses, by identifying specific accounts, departments, etc., whatever granularity you need. You can identify what is allowable for this grant up to a certain cap. And then from there, we can sweep through the NetSuite transactions associated associated with this grant, apply that indirect cost, and generate a NetSuite invoice, all of the transactions that are associated with this particular grant. And I can drill down and look at a specific invoice and see that it was created as part of our automated process to do indirect billing. So this would be for a cost reimbursable type grant. So it indicates that it's a cost recovery invoice for the Wounded Warrior Research, and it had picked up a variety of expenses that had been charged on different vendor bills. So we have complete traceability or audit trail throughout our grant system, showing which transactions and how they're related between the expenses and the revenue. We can also keep track of what effort has potentially been allocated to this particular grant. So for you have your variety of employees that might be working on a grant. Are they 50%? 100% dedicated, etc. So we can also use that information when we're generating salary-based effort reporting and indirect or direct cost calculations. And we can also keep track of grant matching. Many of you will have this scenario that you may receive grants, but that grant is dependent upon another grant matching it, maybe dollar for dollar, or in this case, 25% on the dollar that we would be tracking. And from there, we can then take a look at, okay, which transactions are in the system that are related to the Wounded Warrior grant, but have a secondary match occurring, and what was that match amount? So again, that sometimes is an important condition of your grant, is to be able to document the fact that you are using matching funds. That could be from your general fund or from, in this case, a separate grant that is paired together with this primary grant. And then speaking of primary grants, to our allocations. So I can allocate our grant to either projects or, in this case, subaward. So a subaward in this case is a pass-through grant, meaning that I might be the prime recipient of a grant, but I need to allocate this for a subcontractor or a vendor to perform the work, or maybe this is being done in a different country. So I'm going to partner with a nonprofit in a different part of the world, and they're going to implement, in this case, the lab research. So if I switch over to my subaward here, this looks fairly similar to the grant, modeled basically the same. We can keep track of all the dates and so forth and the award amount. But in this case, this is bound award amounts that we are going to be providing to another organization. We can establish a budget. I can also specify what it would be used for. I can track the same terms and conditions that we have set up on the inbound side. We can do this on the outbound side, and I can set up milestones as well. So these would be audits or reports that your grantees would be required to submit back to you. And again, I'm mentioning the grantee, and that's actually a vendor within NetSuite. So I can then have transactions working with the vendor as far as issuing vendor bills and payments to that vendor. Now, one of the key things that we'll do, you can see we have a couple of bills and bill payments, but I can also track grantee expenses. So we provide a custom transaction within NetSuite that will show all of the expenses that a grantee might have. This is a non-posting transaction, so that does not actually affect your financials, but you're able to show from an audit perspective exactly what has been spent by the grantee. So it fills out the full 360-degree view of the grant, starting from the inbound side and going all the way to the outbound side. Let me wrap up with a little bit of grant reporting. Since all of this data is on the NetSuite platform, we can surface it on your homepage and have various KPIs set up. We can keep track of grant amounts by administrator or by status, whether you have a pending grant or a grant that's been submitted but not yet approved. So we can keep track of all of those different life cycle status values and show that in a nice grant form. And then finally, we can generate what's called the Federal Financial Report. I believe it's the 425 report. And what we do here is we actually produce the standard report that you might submit for federal related grants based upon a particular time range. And so you can see in this case from July 1st through the end of December 31st, 2019, we'll sweep through all of the NetSuite transactions and calculate your receipts and expenditures for that. So then you can save that, review it, and submit it back to the government for your financial grant reporting requirements.
Thank you so much, Mike. And with that, we're going to enter the Q&A portion of our webinar. Matt, the first question is for you. One of our attendees is wondering how difficult it was to train users on the PyanGo solution.
Not difficult at all. It was about 20 minutes to half an hour for each lesson. We had everyone on the Teams call and we showed them how to use it, how to log in. Then we were off to the races. We were showing everyone the new process of how internally we get the information to me, how it's inputted into the system, and how it goes through. It was very simple. It was a very simple process.
One of our attendees wants to know what features are in PyanGo that weren't native to NetSuite.
So when we were sourcing new applications, new accounting applications and platforms to go with, not many of them had the ability to do the automation of indirect cost and revenue. And specifically, when I was asking these questions to potential platforms, I made a point of exception items when calculating indirect costs. And at that point, there are certain companies that did not know what I was trying to get at, but then NetSuite and PyanGo, they knew exactly what the goal was and how to get there. And it was just something that was refreshing to have another company be able to address that kind of issue. Because as I was talking about doing indirect costs before, obviously using Excel and exporting data does save time, but where a lot of time is spent is manually assessing exceptions to grants. Certain grants allow indirect costs on equipment, subrecipient costs, others do not. And so, as we saw earlier in the presentation, the ability to establish those ahead of time saves a tremendous amount of time. And that's something I didn't see during any other platform's presentation.
Matt Weiner?
I would say for me, it's really in the automation of the information. That's one of the main things that I've always had to struggle with, because a lot of people keep this information on Excel files and requests come in, information is needed right now, and it's a lot of sometimes hunting and pecking for information to find it. And this solution really took care of all of that. Like I say, you put the information in, you have it, so now it's as it comes along, you're not reinventing the wheel. It's actually a very easy process to put it in, and for the reporting itself, it saves me a lot of time.
Another attendee is wondering, how do you manage grant balances across years? Does PyanGo carry display ending balance for 1 year and beginning balance for the next, or does it do something else? So how about it, Mike? How does PyanGo handle that?
That's actually, again, the beauty of being on the platform with NetSuite. That cash balance year over year is actually tracked as part of core financials. And so as transactions occur, that is calculated automatically. And then we will reference that on the grant award itself. That's again, kind of the marriage between NetSuite financials and the grant award system.
Gentlemen, another attendee is wondering, do you develop grant budgets in PyanGo, or do you develop them outside of PyanGo and then import the final result into PyanGo?
For budgets themselves, they are developed outside of when it comes to submissions and awards. But as far as the input of the budgets, that would be Matt.
Right. So in that regard, I'm able to upload the budgets into NetSuite, and NetSuite does also have reporting that could be used in that regard, but those numbers could also be viewed in PyanGo as well. So if there's a user that doesn't want to get into the nitty-gritty of grant budgets, they could also see that information in PyanGo in a more summarized format.
One more question from an attendee, Matt. What reporting do your PIs see?
Submissions, you can report in any variety of detail. You can report by the center, by the organization overall, the center, by the PI, by a specific research sector that they are involved with. So you can really drill down, and you're getting all of the detail. The page that you showed before, you have a lot of different bits of information. You're able to pull those details into the report, so you can customize the report to show what you need. If you download it into Excel, of course, you can manipulate the files and further customize it to how you want it. But it really depends upon what your need is and who are the people who actually need to see this information. You can have reports set up that they can run at any time frame, so you're always getting reports out, and you could just send them right to a person right through the system. So it's a big time saver.
Thanks for attending this session at Digital Suite World. I want to thank my speakers from Indianapolis MPO and Kessler Foundation. For more information on PyanGo, visit us at LinkedIn or pyango.com.